And next up, we have a great panel discussion about AIs in research, which I think is very to the point in the day and age that we're working in today. And we have this with a group of very highly experienced domain experts. And so for those of you who are just tuning in on YouTube and other places, my name is Jelani. I'm one of the executive leads at DeSci World, and I will be moderating this panel. And joining me today, we have Martin Karlsson, who is the co-founder of Lateral.ai. Richard, I believe, is here, who is the founder of or co-founder of Algovera, and we have Adrian Smith, who is a software engineer at Ott. And in lieu of badgering your guys' history, though I've met a few of you already, I'm going to give you the opportunity once we kick this off to kind of just give a brief introduction of what you're doing and what your platform is looking or is working on in the AI field, and then we'll jump into the questions. One other disclaimer I want to make is that the goal of this is to be a pluralistic panel. So if the audience has questions, commentaries, you can do so on YouTube as well. Please put them in. We'll field them and I'll relay them to the speakers. So without further ado, Adrian, how about you start? We'd love to hear about just a short introduction about yourself and Ott.
Yeah, sure. So I've been working at Ott for almost a year now. And basically, the thing that got me to join was I was interested in the kind of general problem of using language models for scientific research, for like understanding the world. And Ott had a wealth of experience in this relative to anyone else I had looked at. They've been working in this space since like 2019, and are right now primarily focused on automating lit review and meta-analyses. And I think doing exciting things in the space. So yeah.
Awesome. Glad to hear that. Looking forward to hearing your insights in terms of what this actually means. How does it translate to scientists and on the day-to-day? And as somebody who specifically left academia partially for the publishing hurdle, I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of new insights I can bring to my fellow friends and be like, hey, this is going to fix your problem. Martin, it's been a while. How are you doing? I'm glad that you're here. I'd love to hear about you and introduce you to the rest of the community.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jelani. Great to see you. And thanks for the invite for the panel. Looking forward to the discussion. So just as a quick context, co-founded Lateral quite a while ago. And the journey we've been on is really how to use language models and machine learning to help people who are trying to solve problems find the information they need faster. And more recently, in the past couple of years, that's focused in on essentially helping people read PDFs faster. And I like putting it that way because I think one of the key things that we like to focus on is that with a lot of AI and all these types of technologies, in the end, what we try to boil it down to are very simple experiences that solve immediate challenges, but then have long-term impact in terms of what that unleashes in terms of productivity and problem solving. So with one hat at Lateral, we've been building that out and supporting researchers with that tool. And then more recently, in the DeSci hat, we've been working with on establishing the coordination network, which is really taking the next step of how you can use LLMs to coordinate research and actually then also look at how do you effectively distribute funding to unleash, let's say, a permissionless path to contributing as fast as possible using all these tools. So I'll keep it brief, but that's a quick introduction.
Two amazing platforms. I've had the opportunity to see the demo of the coordination network, and I think that is very, very important. I think one of the biggest, most underrated challenges in science, especially modernizing science, is that lack of coordination that exists. There's no, people shy away from centralized, but there's no hub, in lieu of a better term, of a place where most scientists or all scientists can come on and really get a good understanding of what is happening in this space real time. I like to equate it to, if you go to the stock market, you see all these financial graphs of live action, what's going on in the space. We don't have that in science. And I think it would go a long way in having that in science, though it's a lot of data to digest. And this is where AIs may help us. And so as a first question, we have Richard. So I'll give Richard a chance to connect and give us a brief introduction about himself. Richard, can you hear us? Hey, Richard.
Hey, how's it going? Sorry,
it's going good, man. Late. Hey, good. It's okay. So we just brief introduction about yourself and Algovera, and away we'll go.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm Richard. I'm the founder of Algovera. What we are working on is a platform for building various different types of LLM apps, things like LLM workflows, LLM assistants and LLM agents. And so, yeah, I'll talk about some of these in my presentation and how they can be used for science and how we have been using them for science so far.
Amazing. And I think that's a really good point. So we'll get into how we frame these relative to each of your respective platforms and entities. And so I think the first question, just off the cuff, is based on yourselves, where have you seen AIs being really helpful in revolutionizing science today? What are some of the applications that have excited you and ones that you're looking at like, oh, this is really a good application? And for those who don't really understand what AI is, what can you tell them in terms of what AI can do to optimize their workflow? And please feel free at any point, maybe Adrian, you can start with it and then we'll go around.
Sure. Our general like approach is to think of like language model. I'm going to focus specifically on language models. There's a lot of other stuff in the AI space, but I think you have to narrow somewhat. Are like a pretty mediocre research assistant, but they're very cheap and you can have a lot of them. And so when you approach a problem and say like, how can AI help solve this? The question is like, are there ways we can break down this task into something, some small pieces that I'd be like willing to give to someone that I don't like trust that much, and then at the end can synthesize into my final work. And so a lot of this for us is like you have a bunch of research and you want to say like, get me particular pieces from this, so like effect sizes and stuff. And a lot of these like, in theory, you could just like use traditional methods to get these from the text of a paper, but it doesn't actually work that well. Language models provide the flexibility to get a lot of like individual kind of structured information out of the research literature. And what we've seen is like a lot of people do this today, have this workflow today, and they like have 500 grad students or whatever going out and doing this pretty menial work that's boring for everyone involved. And I think that's like a really promising area.
Yeah, I think so too. And you brought up really two interesting points that we're going to touch upon later. So one being, how does this change the career trajectory or the opportunities that of emerging positions as it move forward, and then a few of the other things. But Martin and Richard, maybe Martin, you go first. Again, just to reiterate the question, what are some of the ways that we're seeing AI and various aspects of AI, so LLMs versus others, in helping revolutionize science today?
Yeah, so I think maybe dovetailing on Adrian's response, I think what I would add to that would be accelerating serendipity, essentially. So I think what's quite fun is that there's both, because I think Adrian raises a really important point, which is that when using these tools responsibly, I think, there's a lot of, let's say, noise in the media about, razzmatazz things going on, using a kind of archaic term for it. But I think the key thing here is breaking it down into very transparently understandable pieces and show how it accelerates that process. But what's fun by doing so as well is that once you have a network of people doing this, language models are very effective in also making fuzzy matches. So I think what I think on the lit review side and that type of work, you have this opportunity that people might be prompted to make a connection faster than they would normally. And a lot of discovery that's happened historically. I remember one really good example, tied to mRNA vaccines being two researchers meeting at the photocopy machine type scenario. And then they met each other, and that was something that unlocked a path to understanding mRNA. And just if you imagine the scale of acceleration of what is now possible as people are doing this research in networked environments, and then you have the LLM prompting them to say, have you considered this perspective? It doesn't transfer the agency to the LLM. It rather just puts that information in front of a researcher to make that connection faster. So I think I'm really excited about that in the specific case of especially literature review and that aspect of research. An area that I'm also really excited by is in essence, like different digital twin environments that become possible, and what you will be able to do in terms of simulating different environments and doing experiments in those type of environments at a scale and at a pace that was previously not possible. That's an area that isn't my kind of specific domain, but connecting into that is something that we're very excited about as well.
For sure. I really like the point of like essentially AI is being that assistant that helps you distill out information in a way that then procs innovation, right? In ways that you couldn't fathom before, either because you didn't have access to that data, it's not quite within your niche, but because it can encapsulate that and provide it to you, then you have this innovative spark. And I think for those of you who have heard me speak before, the best scientific conversations, or the most stimulating that I've had, are always with non-scientists, because it brokers the divide of what's my box and what's their box. And the questions that come out of that are really, really insightful, though not necessarily pertinent or super like within a particular box. I think AI is being able to help expedite that process is wonderful. So for sure, Richard, love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, sure. So I think we've had a pretty big paradigm shift recently with LLMs in that, before the LLM was the entire system. We would just pass an input and get an output. And what we've really seen in the last like 6 months to a year is building these systems where the language model is just one component of a larger system. For example, you could use an LLM along with a knowledge database of some description. It could be a vector database or something like that. Maybe we use it with a collection of workflows. We've seen people building agents, and I think these are the sorts of things that really excite me. We're still really early into that, and I don't think we've seen too many applications of that in science. And I think there's obviously big question marks about how far we can really push these LLM apps. Like, can we get them to generate new knowledge, which is kind of the holy grail of AI, right? So I think a lot of it is still unproven, but that's definitely what we're diving into a lot. Building these LLM apps, whether they're things like workflows or agents, and usually using them for, as some of the others mentioned, data processing tasks, which is what deep learning models are really good at, just mapping from one type of data to a different type of data. So for example, we've built LLM workflows and agents to read research papers from archive and process that into some condensed form of information, whether it's like a knowledge graph or an extended abstract from a paper and all these sorts of things. This is what we're using these for at the moment to help us to be more productive in, say, reading research papers and things like that. We've also built LLM workflows and agents for extracting insights from news articles and starting to build knowledge graphs. So yeah, just a bunch of data processing applications. I think it's still really expensive to do with OpenAI. So if you want to process all of the papers on archive that come out every day, it's prohibitively expensive. And actually, I think this is where decentralized AI comes in. And using local language models that you can just run on your laptop when you're not using it to really just be continuously processing this information. So that's some of the stuff that I'm really excited about.
That's a really good segue. So the way that I envision the application of current iteration of AIs is an n-gram growth. And so for those who don't quite understand what an n-gram is, it's the data accompanied by the knowledge around that data and that packaged as a unit. And we ourselves, as individuals who are participating in the realm of building AI agents and very specialized AI agents, I think that's the most interesting direction, at least currently, where we can see. So to kind of just summarize all that, the ability to generate n-grams more easily, help push science forward, or help push any really realm forward is one of the really critical points that I think AI brings to the realm. But Richard, to your last point, and maybe just to give us kind of a primer, maybe this is a really interesting topic, but what is the difference between decentralized and a centralized AI agent, practically speaking?
Yeah, I think I guess how I define it is that if it runs on the cloud, on someone else's computer, it's probably centralized AI, right? Whereas I think of decentralized AI as running on my local machine, whether it's a laptop or a phone or something like that. And we've seen a lot of progress with this recently with llama.cpp running on laptops. People have got language models running on phones and that sort of thing. So it's really come a long way in the last year, to the point where it hasn't really been possible to build things unless you are using OpenAI, and now it's becoming more and more feasible. So I think that has a lot of desirable properties running things locally. I already mentioned one of them, which is cost, right? If I want to process a ton of data, I can't really do that on OpenAI at the moment, whereas I have this idle compute time on my laptop, so maybe I can just keep the LLM running for longer than I would be able to on the cloud somewhere, right? And then, of course, there's advantages in terms of privacy as well. If I have a local language model, I can run it on data that I wouldn't necessarily want to upload to the cloud. And I think it's also just more desirable from a Yeah, from a ethical or value perspective, in that, you know, we don't want a platform that, you know, controls a lot of what can be done using LLMs. And so I think having these LLMs in more places is more desirable.
So what's the trade-off then? What's the negative? And any of you can answer this, obviously. But I imagine one of these trade-offs is if it's local, then it doesn't necessarily have access to the wider corpus of information or the knowledge record that exists out there. And also if they're unable to necessarily speak with another. So if local AI 1 doesn't talk to local AI 2, then you also have that prevention capacity. That may not be it, but that's off the top of my head. If so, where's the value then, or how do we incorporate that and scale that such that we do still maintain some of the benefits of that local AI agent, as well as mitigating some of those other ones? And if there are others, please feel free.
My sense of things is that the main negative to running local models is really just like the quality of model that you can run locally today, and I think for the foreseeable future, is much lower than the quality of model that you can run in the cloud. I mean, like basically I would argue pretty strongly, I think basically every local model today is like substantially worse than the models being provided by Anthropic or OpenAI. Llama 2 recently-ish came out and is like fairly compelling. There's definitely things out there, and so if you can like find a way to get your problem into a smaller space or like fine-tune things on a particular data set, you can definitely get higher quality results. But like the big learning of language models, like the whole thesis underlying the development of large language models has been that like actually the only thing that matters is having lots of compute. Nothing else matters. You should just throw as much compute as possible at the problem. And so I think we should be like pretty skeptical of claims that we can like get competitive results with like get cutting edge competitive results with models that have many fewer parameters. On the flip side, like there are cases where you just can't. Like the privacy one is really compelling, which is like you have a thing, you just don't want to send this to anyone else. But even in that world, I think like running a large Llama 2 model or a medium-sized Llama 2 model on like your own cloud provider that you have like a relationship of trust with is like probably much more viable than running it on your laptop. You can run Llama on a MacBook, but your tokens per second is like very slow. It's like vastly slower than what you're getting from OpenAI, even with like the best optimizations we have today. This will definitely change over time, but like even as what's on laptops gets faster and better, what's running from the major labs is getting better at the same time. And I don't see those lines converging anytime soon.
Martin, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think what I would add is probably if you unpack kind of these pipelines and the different models and where the data is stored and so on, I guess the angle that I would take, the pragmatic view that I would take on it, is to try to understand, you know, what problem you're solving for the researchers essentially, and the what are the parameters by which you want to solve that problem, like privacy. And also, you know, there's a bunch of ethical questions that people have raised when it comes to LLMs as well. So I think one way to kind of square the circle is to get more nuanced of like what these pipelines look like, and then have options of what to go with. I think that builds on both what Richard and Adrian have been saying, but very clearly articulating that to researchers. And you know, for example, we've been working in this space for the past 10 years. So the language models that we used before LLMs were still very helpful for researchers. And so I think it's, you know, there's ways that I think you can create user experiences now that are a seamless experience that lets then users essentially make a choice of, you know, how is their data going to be used and what are the terms by which that data gets used and so on. Because I think it's very much this, from my perspective, it's definitely our experience as well, you know, that the centralized models are really, you know, very capable in a way that maybe some of the open source ones aren't quite yet, but I think it's designing for a future where hopefully there will be more optionality going forward. So how do we create experiences that allow for that and enable that, but also allow people to make use of the best possible capabilities that they can today? So I think that yeah, taking that into account as we design these systems and not just essentially going with one path, I think is a way to also do it responsibly, to give those options. Yeah.
So it seems like, I mean, based off of what Adrian said, but also what Richard said, some of the leading drawbacks to the decentralized AIs is that, one, they're really expensive. and your local AI may not have the capacity or power to be able to scale or compare with the centralized ones. And there's also privacy considerations. I think in the theme of this conference of SciCon, we've touched upon really interesting ideas of distributed networks and how you can pool small capacity to be able to reach it at scale. And so things where you might have a distributed network of GPU or CPU capacity, is that a viable solution to plug into a local node AI or a local AI agent such to boost its power and bring it to maybe not parity, but close enough to parity? Anybody?
Yeah, I think this idea of using idle compute time is a really interesting one. And it's actually what we kind of stumbled across this just by building all of these different workflows and agents that, operate on science papers or news articles and that sort of thing. We just realized that we just couldn't run the LLMs on all of the data that we wanted to because it was just too expensive. And then that's when I started thinking, lots of people have laptops that could run these LLMs. So why not, have some sort of volunteer compute, LLM agents at home or something like that, similar to like folding at home or something like that. I think it's a really interesting, unexplored use case, and it's actually something that Algovera we're thinking about building, some sort of AI node that people can run locally on their computer, and then just run science data processing workflows in the background. And yeah, to Adrian's point, I think there's definitely cases where we still need to use centralized LLMs, especially for reasoning. That's really where GPT-4 and even GPT-3 are like ahead of a lot of the open source models is in their reasoning ability. Hopefully, the open source models can catch up by doing more training on code and these sorts of things. But at the moment, like if you want to do reasoning, you really have to use OpenAI. So yeah, I think it depends on the use case. Sometimes we're going to need to use centralized models. Sometimes we're going to have to use these local models where it's prohibitively expensive or the privacy is an issue. And kind of using all of these things in combination I think there's lots of opportunities there.
Cool. Adrian, do you want to jump in on that with it, or?
No, that basically makes sense to me. I think I generally am excited for anyone who can like really make substantial progress on doing something folding at home adjacent in this space. And I also am, it is a very hard problem to solve. And I'm glad someone else is working on it.
I'm sure. I mean, to that point, we need a collective community effort, right? People specifying on different aspects as we have, decentralized coordination and actually application here. With regards to the privacy, the idea of, and I've stumbled across a few projects in the Web3 DeSci adjacent space that are looking to, incorporate blockchain and the privacy capacity and own your keys and have these kind of frameworks built into AIs, where now AIs have wallets and they can expend funds to then gain access to information that may be siloed somewhere else. Is that one way? And I might have just badgered that whole structure, but is that one consideration that can go forward in terms of allowing privacy while still interacting with, if not decentralized, but centralized agents? No, maybe so.
Can you repeat the wallet part? I didn't fully get it.
Yeah, so in the same premise where we have crypto, where I have custody over data, financial, whatever have you, and I have a wallet and keys. Is there a similar archetype or a similar structure that we can implement in, let's say, these local AIs, or this, maybe not the local AI, sorry, the centralized AIs, such that we can preserve privacy while still interacting with and getting the benefits of these more larger models that have better reasoning skills and whatnot, without giving up access to all the information?
I think it's pretty hard right now because, sorry, you can go ahead.
No, go ahead, Adrian. You go ahead first.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think it's pretty challenging right now because, like, you have to do the compute somewhere. And so if you are running this compute on anything besides your own computer, you're like giving them the data necessarily. I mean, if someone can get like zero knowledge proof stuff working with a language model, that would be insane and very exciting. But I think that's probably still a while away. Where I do potentially see this coming in, some of like the crypto concepts coming in, is a lot of the like, you want to feed data into a model where you want to like do at inference time or even at training time. And I know you kind of have hinted towards some of these like questions around intellectual property and like where's training data coming from, or like inference data that you're doing things with. And I do think there's a potential model there of saying like, oh, how do you like choose where you're pulling in data and like reward people for providing useful training data or useful inference data. So I feel like there's a lot of promise there. But as far as the like trying to use crypto systems to increase privacy, I think it would be pretty hard. I'm sure there are like theoretical approaches, but I think again a real challenge with a lot of this, the space moves so quickly that like if you spend a year and a half, 2 years working on some like cool theoretical cryptography based approach to like to pass training data between various nodes or something, by the time you've done this, like the models have leapt forward a bunch, and you kind of have to start from scratch. So yeah, that sort of thing seems quite hard. I think there's maybe promising stuff in like the using cryptographic principles to like reward data providing and like say allow you to like verifiably show that your model has only been trained on certain kinds of data or something.
Mm-hmm. Martin, I know Lateral leverages cryptography in the wallet framework. How does that work within your framework? Or what do you envision with regards to that, the integration of the two, if possible?
Yeah, so I think for us, it's more focused not so much on the model training at this point, but more in terms of, if you're going to be, how do you have records of who contributed what? So it dovetails essentially on what Adrian was saying. So what we're looking to have is establish a model where how can you have a record of contribution essentially when you have a collaborative environment from researchers, which in the future may feed into model training systems essentially. So it's at this stage, the first version that we've been building is actually default as public as possible, but then with immutability around whoever contributed something, they have a record that they contribute that at that point in time. Now going forward, I think I know that I think Richard can probably speak to this as well, because I think with Ocean Protocol and kind of also to Backlao and these type of projects, I think there's different mechanisms that might open up. But for the moment, we think it more in terms of attribution and what opens up around that, which is another, I imagine, point of conversation in this context, than currently driving that into the training process.
No, absolutely. I mean, who was it? Nassim, who referenced it previously, where you have these AI agents in the artistic realm that are now being sued, or OpenAI is being sued by a bunch of people because it's using their intellectual property. And in science, arguably, that becomes even more pronounced or even more of a consideration when your reputation is tagged to what you've produced. And so if you have these agents that are facilitating scientific research, where is the provenance? Is their ability to find where is it sourcing its information such that that can either be added as an author, or the right attribution and creditation can go to those individuals. And so, Richard, I don't know if you have any consideration. I'm sure you do. You have considerations of that in Algovera, and I know Martin, you do as well, and Adrian, I imagine you do as well. Any insights with regards to that would be great.
Yeah, I think most of the stuff that I've seen wallets used for is usually around ownership of data, and I think that's a really important one. Like, if, let's say, for example, if I have an asset uploaded to Hugging Face, I don't own that asset. Hugging Face can remove that. I don't have the keys to that, right? So I think like using wallets, that's something that I have seen a lot, whether it's with Ocean Protocol or Nevermind and different projects like that. I actually haven't seen a bunch of stuff that like kind of combines privacy with decentralization. I actually think it's somewhere that that could use more R&D. Like, for example, IPFS or even the Backlao compute projects, they've chosen to work with public data to start because it's a hard enough problem on its own, and then at some point in future they'll introduce private data once it's working well on public data. And I think that's kind of typical of the direction that a lot of projects have gone in so far. Even like compute to data on Ocean Protocol. It's not perfectly secure, and there's issues like, when you send the algorithm to the data owner, they can see the algorithm and that sort of thing. So there's there's still a lot of problems that haven't been solved with that, I guess, and that's probably an area that could use more research, especially combined with decentralization. Yeah, I think the problem is hard enough just with public data on its own, and yeah, maybe once we solve that, people will dive more into the privacy side of things as well.
Is there going to be I mean, I say this, nobody can tell the future, but I imagine a framework where you have both. So you can leverage centralized AI where you need to, and you can leverage decentralized where you need to. Is that essentially where you see the future actually being? Is that going to be the best of both worlds? Anybody?
Yeah, I think so. I think we need many different types, many different approaches to AI, and centralized proprietary AI has obviously made a ton of progress. Like, it's given us all of these amazing models that we have. I think we should also have decentralized approaches to AI, or maybe crypto approaches to AI. I think like the more different approaches to AI, the better. And I think the outputs of all of those are going to be useful in different scenarios.
Yeah, and I think what I would add there would just be to say that, like, with the trajectory of a lot of these things societally, I feel that a lot of the capabilities that crypto brings and decentralization brings can help solve fundamental challenges that we're going to be facing. I mean, like, to pull it out of the research realm, just the speed at which fake content can be created, having paths to having immutably verified ways of saying this was created by me becomes very, very important. So I think the reason I say that is just to say that right now, it's definitely the case that centralized approaches allow you to, I think, achieve certain things faster, in a sense, also because it's more aligned with the traditional resource allocation mechanisms that we have societally. But as these issues become more pertinent and kind of a burning issue in front of people's eyes, the hope would also be that resources can shift to solving some of these very hard problems and kind of heighten their priority as well. So my hope is that this pluralistic world of optionality will also be accelerated by people realizing we really need to solve these problems now, because otherwise we're in big trouble.
Yeah, I agree. And so, I mean, I'm sure you've all have had experiences. I mean, Martin, I know Lateral has worked with Foresight. Richard, you guys have worked with Nevermind. And Adrian, I don't know quite what you guys have worked with, but I'm sure it's extensive and involves researchers. In your opinions, in your respective opinions, what are some of the bottlenecks that are limiting more comprehensive and extensive use of AI agents and the benefits that currently exist to helping to promote research? Off the top of my head, I would imagine that some of the things that, as a researcher, if I'm trying to incorporate my data or have an AI help emphasize and push forward my data, there may be issues with regarding standardized raw data formats, structured versus unstructured data, inaccessibility to the data that I actually want to or is necessary for providing context to my question. Are these actual issues? And if so, are there others that need to be considered more from the human perspective in terms of limiting my understanding of how best to use these agents?
I think I feel like my take here might be unusual, which is I think a lot of the limitations or bottlenecks are actually in user experience design. I think that like there are bottlenecks that are just like, oh, the language model quality, can you get reliable answers? I feel pretty confident that we continue to make progress there, both as the underlying models get better, particular techniques around like how you prompt things, et cetera. I feel like the path there feels kind of laid out in some ways. It's like hard, but it seems like it's moving along. I think one of the things that we've really found is that everyone basically defaults to like the chatbot UX. But like if you're doing complex reasoning, this like just doesn't scale very well. You want to pull in data from a bunch of different sources. You want to be able to have like more complex relationships between the things you're talking about. There's just like a pretty large scope of problems that researchers care about that are really ill-served by like talking to a chatbot that's gonna just like tell you stuff. This is really big in the kind of verifiability questions where you can ask a chatbot for some information and it'll be like, this is the answer. And sometimes it'll give citations. Those citations might not be real. You can like do some, existing people have done some things where you like try to provide links in context to where it found that information. But also there's things around like, how do you expose like the reasoning process that resulted in a particular answer in some way that like isn't annoying to the researcher, but like they have access to that context if they need it. So I just think there's a lot of like, I think it's really notable that the chat UI is both the one that is in some ways most naively falls out of how language models work, and it's like the first one we did, more or less. And it's where we still are, pretty much. And I think it's unlikely that the thing we stumbled onto first is the thing that we're going to be still using in 2 years' time. I think there's a lot of questions around like, how do you actually use language models, bundle them into an experience that matches the problems researchers are trying to solve.
Yeah, I agree. Leveraging things like connection network or Obsidian, these frameworks that allow you to use AI plugins while also simultaneously providing context to your question, to your prompt, right? I think that falls under the concept of prompt engineering, and how best to frame your question in a way that the AI agent can actually understand. And that exists beyond the AI, right? That's a user experience, and to one side, a training of the individual to better understand how best to frame it. Because for those obviously listening, AI is a tool. It's not the be all end all. It is how you utilize said tool that will give you the best returns. Martin, Richard, any other insight with regard to what are some of the limitations that exist out there for people trying to or wanting to leverage AI currently?
Yeah, I think what I would maybe add to Adrian's point is less technical and actually more institutional and societal, in the sense that when you're looking at faculties and how they're looking to grapple with like introducing AI into their education process. On the one hand, there's that entire methodology element of it, where I think there's a lot of education alongside then the UX that needs to be done for established institutions to understand like how do they grapple this. That's a huge I think bottleneck that we've seen, because there's some scenarios that are just kind of wild. If you think of just the when people come into education and what they're taught, having a path to that education actually being up to speed with what's now possible is just like there's a huge gap there. And especially anyone who's watching this is probably already interested in this space. I don't think they appreciate how huge that gap is. And then the second one, which links to the earlier conversation as well, is cost. And I think this is a really kind of interesting one where the DeSci element of it becomes very important, because, as we all spoke to, compute is expensive, especially at scale. And I think what the other bottleneck becomes, how can you create new value flows that enable, broad access to these tools, and consider that, it shouldn't be the case that only those that can pay for a subscription, for example, to something are able to use these tools. And that requires also updating how we think about distributing resources so that people can get access to this, because otherwise we run the risk of creating even bigger gaps in society based on who has access to these systems and who doesn't. So I think actually those are the ones that need a lot of work in terms of allowing society to kind of benefit from the full throughput of this acceleration that could be taking place, more so than technical questions.
Yeah, so it's always interesting how you wouldn't expect, and I have the commentary all the time, that it's the socio-psychological perspective that really is important when it comes to changing the paradigm and actually allowing people to leverage these frameworks, even develop these frameworks in an optimized way to actually impact what we do on the day-to-day. Right? Like the tooling is great, the funding is great, but it's how these things are leveraged by those people who are going to extract value from them that is important. And what kind of frameworks can we put in place for these individuals to better understand what best ways, and that's kind of loose because everyone has their own definition of how to leverage these things. Richard, I saw you unmute previously. Would you like to provide some insight as well?
Yeah, sure. I think the user interface is a really big one. We work with lots of different companies who are interested in adopting LLMs, and we usually work with them to figure out a workflow within their organization that would be good for LLMs, and then we write the code for them. And after working with a few of them, we started to notice like patterns about things that were common between these different projects and started thinking about how we could make it easier for the organizations to implement these LLM workflows themselves, rather than paying contractors to do that. So I think it's just still really, really early in terms of the ways that we build these LLM apps. I don't even think we have like the common framework, like the PyTorch of LLM workflows, for example. I know LangChain is the most popular at the moment, but there's also a lot of other ones that are trying to be built. And then, the only people that can really build these LLM apps at the moment are, developers, like Python developers, JavaScript developers. So I think we're going to see much more stuff, maybe more, Zapier-like. I know like some Microsoft cloud apps are trying to make this easier as well. And I think, once we enable people who are non-AI developers to build these workflows, I think we'll see them integrated much more into a lot of these different companies. And I think one of the other things that we need is we don't even have a hub for all of these different types of plugins or skills or workflows and all these sorts of things. So like if I create a workflow that's really useful for processing research papers, where do I share that at the moment? Like maybe Hugging Face, but it's not really, it wasn't really built for that. It's not ideal. I know that LangChain are trying to build a hub now for prompts, but they still haven't got as far as, workflows or plugins or anything like that. You can't even use plugins on OpenAI through their API yet. So the only place you can use plugins is through the ChatGPT app. I can't use it from Python, right? So I think it's just so early with all of these things. And we're going to see a lot more tools, platforms, hubs, all of these sort of things come out. And that's going to make it much easier for organizations to adopt.
And so once we reach those levels where it is, we no longer consider it early and it's widely, applicable, and we start to have automation of routine tasks. Does the question then become, well, to Martin's point, how do we upscale everybody's skill level to understand how that works? I think the world is to his point, changing very drastically. Around the corner, we're going to have the phasing out of, manual jobs or lower skill jobs, because LLMs can do that for us. And then there's essentially going to be, or hopefully the development of novel careers and novel job opportunities that come from that. What kind of perspective, and I'm sure you guys have thought about it, like what does that future look like to you? What are some of the new skills that an individual is going to need to have in the next 10 years to be able to compete in a job market where you have AI assistants here doing a lot of the more manual, menial labor that currently exists? Martin.
Yeah, so I think I have a few thoughts on this. So I guess that in the nearest term, one thing I would mention is that right now, a lot of these tools is not so much about replacing people as just getting them from out underwater, basically. Like right now, if you consider the life of a post grad, they're drowning in like tasks. And so I'd say like one thing just to mention on this topic is that in the near term, what we really want is to unleash that, like unload that burden so they can really get focused on what really drove them on that path, which was probably trying to solve some complex problem that they're very passionate about. So I think there's a lot of, like in the near term, there's a huge opportunity in terms of unburdening people from those menial tasks so that they can actually focus on what they want to focus on, essentially. Beyond that, I think going a little bit further into the future, I think it becomes more, there's a lot of opportunities of how you can become a conductor essentially of these systems, so that it becomes this broader orchestra of agents that are assisting you, and really creating quite an exciting future in terms of the acceleration and what that unlocks. And in addition, that it's not only the individual, it's really how does this facilitate an interdisciplinary network where you can bring people together, facilitated via their agents who are then conducting these different agents in pursuit of the answers. This is kind of the world that I see in the very near future coming into existence. And that's my optimistic take, at least, where it becomes how we conduct these orchestras in pursuit of societal outcomes that help us and are the ones that our communities are looking for. And so it doesn't necessarily mean it's not replacing the role of individuals or humans. It's more how to, you know, augment their abilities and reduce the need to take on menial tasks that they actually don't want to be doing anyway, basically.
Yeah, I like that optimistic approach. I think I'm a little bit guarded on the reality of what that actually is going to look like, but I very much agree. That's, I think the crux of it really should be to augment and support than necessarily replace and phase out. But Adrian, Richard, love to hear your perspectives as well. Adrian.
Yeah. I think this is like a really fascinating area. To me, the core of it is this, there's a saying, ars longa vita brevis, which is like the art is long, life is short. And I think it's really at the heart of like what makes scientific progress slower than it should be, which is, you know, in the past, if you're a Newton and you want to like learn everything there is to know about astronomy or physics, you can like basically do this in a year. There's like not that much that you have to read up on. There's only so many people who have written about this before you. And then you can kind of immediately start doing like original work that is really pushing the field forward. As time has gone on, the like scope of human research on any topic has expanded exponentially. And so today, if you wanted to like become an expert in all written physics, this is like impossible. Like you could spend your entire life doing this and you would not know the expanse of everything that has ever been published on the topic. And so this forces people into like narrower and narrower subdisciplines where you can learn everything and then try to contribute to this subdiscipline. But that itself limits because like there are a lot of, you know, important insights that would require cross-disciplinary knowledge. And so if we can get to a place where like the time it takes to become like versed in a new field can be shortened, because, you know, instead of going out and like, you know, if you sometimes you find a new area and you read that like one really good paper that just makes a whole subfield make sense. It's like, oh, so someone has gone through, they've learned everything, and then they've like perfectly encapsulated it. Like the kind of state of research at that point. If we can get that kind of process automated, then people can enter the field and like spend much less time just like getting up to speed, and can jump right into like actually doing really original research that's pushing the fields further. And I think to me, that's like at the heart of what as people developing these tools, what we should be driving forward is saying like, how can you get someone who today is forced to like, you know, a graduate student who is like doing all this data extraction, trying to like just understand like what's even going on in this field they've just joined, and instead say like, oh, we can give this person everything they need to know to like be doing experimental design on like really cutting edge things within like a year. And I think that just like totally opens the field of the kind of work people are able to produce.
Absolutely. Richard, I see you nodding. I'd love to hear your piece.
Yeah, I just really like that answer. Yeah, like one of the things I still use ChatGPT for the most is when I'm learning some sort of new subject. It's just amazing for getting up to speed on things. It's going to obviously have a huge impact on education. So that's stuff that I'm really optimistic about. I think just like, you know, knowledge in general. So getting people to acquire knowledge quicker as individuals, but also as groups and communities. I think, yeah, I think it's going to improve the way that organizations share knowledge between each other. It's quite a lot of overhead if I gather a new piece of knowledge to communicate that with all of the organizations that we're close with or like to share information with. A lot of that can be automated as well. And I think what's going to happen is as that, as the friction of sharing knowledge between organizations gets lower, I think maybe, you know, the average size of an organization is going to reduce as well. Like this is one of the reasons that people form organizations, right? Is because it makes knowledge transfer between different employees easier. And so if we can, you know, improve that knowledge transferability, maybe we'll have like more small organizations that are, you know, collaborating more effectively and sharing knowledge. So that's kind of like one really like high level thing that I think it might change. And then at a more practical level, I think what it's going to look like for humans more is more humans are going to be project managers essentially. And we see this, I think Martin touched on this, but yeah, like maybe I'm going to have a Kanban board to assign tasks to all of my, agent AIs that are working as interns for me, right? Or maybe I'll adopt the waterfall management approach with my AI agents. And it's really funny to read some of the new research coming out in AI, because especially in multi-agent systems, where people are taking these kind of like management techniques, whether it's like waterfall or something like that, and they're applying it to these like multi-agent systems and seeing that it improves the performance and stuff like that. So yeah, I think like a lot of humans are going to move more up into manager roles, and so we'll be doing less of the maybe coding or kind of like the hard work itself, and more kind of just managing different AI agents that are doing this work for them.
Yeah, I think those are fantastic points, and the not the repercussions, but the ripple effects that extend from that are massive, right? When it comes to leaning down operations, that's a cost saving basis. And then you start to plug into the economy and what that actually leverages from an individual perspective, but also the global economy or the national economy or whatever local economy you're a part of. There's a lot of far-flung repercussions, ripple effects that exist beyond this that I think are really going to be interesting to investigate and to study moving forward as these things start to become mainstream, but actually usable mainstream beyond their current limitations now. And to that actual point, I had a great conversation with Don from Nevermind. For those of you who don't know, check that out. But and Don's a funny guy. One of his perspectives that he shared with me is that, LLMs are just really shitty right now, right? They're very one-dimensional. Like they can translate text only, but there's so much information that exists beyond the concept of transcripts. And so my question to you all as experts in this vicinity, in this field, is when are we going to have video inputs, visual inputs, auditory inputs, and other forms of sensory inputs that can then also inform and feed LLMs? This is probably a wide question, but perspective timeline of when that can be. What are some of the limitations that are stopping that, and why are we currently just dealing with text? All with the caveat in mind, this is all very, very new. So that being said, I would love to hear your kind of insights into that. Adrian, please.
6 months.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think some margins of this I think are like on the presses today. So I think things like understanding diagrams and stuff in documents. Facebook AI Research recently published a paper that does a very good job at this. We're already like looking at including it in Elicit. I think there's like, we already have decent quality understanding of like, oh, you want to take an image. The fundamental struggle right now, right, is like all of these things convert something into text, and your language model reasons on the text. But basically all the major labs have multimodal models in the works. And from what I've seen, those projects are progressing. They're not stalled out. I pretty confidently expect at least one of the major labs to within the next 6 months have a multimodal model available for the public. Again, GPT-4, like OpenAI has definitely talked about this. I think a lot of the stuff you've seen with the recent DALL-E stuff is kind of like a first hint of them moving in that direction. There's a very large scale, like, I think audio and some of these other things will be coming down the pipeline more slowly. But right now, each of those individual fields has seen a lot of progress. I don't know if any of you have like seen some of the text-to-speech models recently, or speech-to-text models in the last year, just being like mind-blowingly good. And all of these are broadly based on similar architectures. And there are lots of people working very hard on getting them into kind of the same pipelines.
Fantastic. So I've just jotted down, Adrian says 6 months. So I'm going to start tallying bets.
Check in on me in 6 months, and if I'm wrong, you can have me buy you a drink.
All right, you guys are all hearing it, so you know what it is, and I will definitely take that up. Martin, what is your prediction and what is your insight into this?
I think, to be honest, I don't know if I think Adrian gave a very good answer. I'm always slightly hesitant to give timeline predictions. I think one thing that I would be more, let's say, flagging would just be I'm going to be intrigued to see the cost side of this. I think the timeline for me is like when when does that become economical? In what scenarios, or how that works out? That's something that is kind of an open question for me at the moment. I'd love to hear if either Adrian or Richard have thoughts on that one, but that's the one that's really like, yeah, that's the big question for me as you enter into that world.
All right, cool. So Martin, I'm going to put you down as a year plus, just in case.
But yeah, different timelines.
Be conservative, different timeline. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm actually going to go lower than everyone. I think like GPT-4 already has multimodal capabilities, right? So they're just turned off. I heard a rumor that the reason that they're turned off is because it's like crazy good at facial recognition. I don't know if that's true or not. But I do think that these multimodal models create a lot of really interesting ethical questions, right? Like whether it is something like facial recognition, for example, it's going to change. It could have consequences there. Also for like scraping the web. Imagine if you can just, go to LinkedIn, take a screenshot of the LinkedIn site, and you no longer need to like find the correct text or something. You just like, convert the image into text, right? It's going to completely change that. So maybe more websites are going to like, go behind paywalls or something like that. Who knows how it's going to affect that as well, right? And then even in terms of audio, people getting scammed and stuff, it's going to create like a bunch of issues there, right? I've heard a lot of people have started creating code words with their loved ones so that if they get a phone call saying that they're in trouble, they can detect if it's an AI, right? So it's going to be really difficult to to tell if it's human or AI at some point. And I think maybe that has already slowed down the release of some of these multimodal models. But I have heard a lot of chatter on Twitter recently about multimodal models, which makes me think that it could be in the next few weeks or something that, a lot of these are going to get released. I'm going to go for like 1 month, I think. I think they're really, really close, just judging by the amount of noise on Twitter, I guess. And I think once maybe Google releases theirs, maybe OpenAI will finally unlock, GPT-4 multimodal, this arms race that we're in, right? So yeah, I think they're coming soon. I think they're going to create some really interesting questions. And yeah, people are going to have to think about what it means for society and some of the norms that we previously had, which might not exist anymore.
So I have 6 months for Adrian, 1+ year for Martin, because I slammed it there, and less than 1 month, approximately 1 month from Richard. I think we're going to hold these to drinks at a conference if we ever converge there, and we'll see what happens with that. But Richard, you bring up a really good point. The power that these models and their future iterations are going to bring, I imagine, are really going to bring the world back into a digital wild, wild west, right? You're going to start to have circumvention of the safeguards, the railguards that we've had in place. And so in the last 4 or 5 minutes or so, but do take your time, what are some of the ethical and legal implications that we really need to start considering when or looking forward into the future? Martin, I know you've worked with Foresight, and a few of you have probably worked with Foresight, and they have a whole AI ethics framework, but inclusive and beyond that, what are some of the considerations that really this population, governments need to take into consideration for that? Adrian, go ahead, if you have any.
Yeah, I mean, I generally think the approach that the large labs have been taking is actually pretty reasonable, of saying like, you should just like give society some time to adjust. I think a lot of these things there is a fair degree of just like natural adjustment. I think deepfakes to me is kind of the classic one, which is like, there's particular technical things that we can try that I think are worth doing, like cryptographic verification of video and stuff. But ultimately, like when printing presses came around, like the average pieces of text used to like only be produced by extremely from a social perspective view, trustworthy people, like people at the top of the hierarchy or whatever. And so like you had a lot of trust in text. And I think like before digital photo editing, like manipulating photos is really hard. And so you basically didn't worry about this. And so I think in a world where we are much better at faking a lot of these things, people just eventually like don't trust these things as much. But that like takes time. And so I think there's a lot of benefit to being like, let's put the brakes on a little bit and give people some time to get caught up with how the world is changing. But
cool. Awesome. Martin?
Yeah, so I think there's two aspects. So one would be, I think this is an area where we as practitioners into space should aim to use these tools to much more clearly articulate the problem in such a way that a broader audience can actually engage with how to address it. So to a lot of the themes we've been discussing, both in terms of Adrian's explanation of how quickly can you learn a discipline, I think one of the biggest issues we've faced on a lot of political scenarios is just how up to speed are different decision makers in these different scenarios actually aware of what is going on. And I think so I'd say, like, from a practical perspective, I would encourage, and this is something we're working at with the coordination work, is a lot around how do you communicate complex topics to multi-stakeholder environments in such a way that they get understanding. So I think using what we have available today to communicate that is something to mitigate the threat. In terms of the threat itself, I think, one of the issues specifically in science is obviously, like, I'm a big proponent of maximizing access for people to, educational path and meritocratic contribution. The flip side is, of course, that if you're making it a lot easier to make complex, scientific inventions or access that information, what are the consequences? And history has told us, with any type of open access to web capabilities, you get some actors that may not have the best intentions. So I think there's also a need to then put in place, barriers that make it at least a little bit harder to do some of those things, alongside putting incentives to not do those things, basically. So what I would say is, packaging up a path to actually address these problems in a way that means that we can have transparency around the decisions that are being made and communicate that to all the different stakeholders. I think this is really a task that is very important, because right now, one of the issues of the dialogue is kind of like, it's not so transparent. There's people who are building things going to regulators and saying, this needs to be done. And I think it needs to be a much richer conversation, and one that is, that there needs to be an entire, like, educational program and PSA around this that I think is something that, but I think what I'd add is that I think we can actually use the tools to do that. So I guess this is how to mitigate that huge task, is that it actually should be a lot easier now. So that's
right.
Yeah.
So the danger actually helps counteract its own danger to a certain extent.
If we proactively do so.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. Right. Richard, love to hear your commentary.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add, other than, I agree with everything that's been said. And I think we need to approach this in the same way that we talked about earlier, which is, just have many different approaches to AI safety. Like, I think OpenAI are doing a pretty good job. Do I want them to decide all of the guardrails for society, or along with big tech? Absolutely not. And I think we should involve more people in the decision-making process, right? And I think there's so much, it's still so early and there's so much we could do here, but what about, a community collaboratively crafting a system message for an LLM to be used within that community, basically defining the rules, the AI constitution that LLM would abide by, right? I think these are really interesting areas that haven't even been explored yet, although I do know one or two people working on that. So I think we're going to see a lot more, like, crowdsourcing of constitutions, crowdsourcing of rules for LLMs, all that sort of stuff. I think is really interesting and probably underexplored. We need more people involved in the conversation, and I don't really like the way that the regulatory stuff appears to be going at the moment. So I think there's a really scary future where people don't get a chance to decide these for themselves.
Yeah, I agree. We definitely need, especially in this realm, we need more awareness. I think people are now coming online to realizing that AI is a thing. They're using it now for, like, menial tasks, but the collective awareness of where this is actually going to bring us is just not there. So conversations like these, and again, shout out to ResearchHub and SciCon 23 for allowing us to have these kind of conversations, are essential. And I know the three of you, and I've seen you guys around enough, either the digital space or in person. to know that you guys are shepherding this kind of conversations, and hopefully we'll continue to do so and bring others with you. So as we close out this space, or this particular segment of SciCon, I'd love to just give you three the opportunity to very briefly, just any parting remarks to the rest of the audience. Adrian, starting with you, go ahead.
Just excited to see where things are going. I think excited to see so many other people thinking hard about like how to deploy these tools responsibly, and help move science forward. Yeah, and if anyone is interested in reading more about our work, check out elicit.com. We publish pretty often on like kind of theoretical approach stuff as well.
Great, thank you, Adrian. Martin.
Yeah, I guess to the theme of SciCon and especially bringing in the DeSci side, I guess I would just emphasize that I think a lot of these topics, what I'm really excited about is that the principles of DeSci and, well, decentralized science, and you know, these new incentive mechanisms, these new mechanisms for understanding, you know, the provenance of information in a verifiable way. I would just emphasize that there's a lot of solutions there to problems that are going to get increasingly top of mind for a lot of people. So I'm really excited to be part of this space, because I think it's really going to be helping to solve many of the challenges that we've been talking about today. And that's, you know, with the coordination network, if anybody's interested in that, feel free to go to coordination.network, because that's where we're pursuing a lot of those questions. Yeah, so also really enjoyed the conversation and excited. I'm an optimist, so I hope we can work together to help realize the good version of the future.
I absolutely agreed. Richard, please close us out.
Yeah, so I've been really interested in AI for science for a really long time. I've been reading, you know, papers about how to build systems for autonomous science and stuff like that pre-LLMs. And I think like we've seen a really big breakthrough with LLMs recently, and I think they've put a lot of these visions within reach, I think. And, you know, maybe LLMs won't get us all the way there. Maybe we need more breakthroughs, but I think maybe they are enough to really get us to, you know, these systems, multi-agent systems of autonomous researchers all collaborating, working together, creating new knowledge. And I think that's really the holy grail of AI. And so I think like working on these things for the use case of science is a really, really exciting one. And I think there's a good chance that science is going to be completely revolutionized in the next, whatever, 5 or 10 years, right? So it's a really, really exciting time to work on all of this stuff, and just keeping up with it day to day on Twitter is like a full-time job, right? But I love it, and I can't wait to keep building. And also check out Algovera AI, or get in touch if you want to like collaborate on, you know, AI workflows for science or agents or anything like that. We'd love to work with you. We love partnering with other organizations.
Fantastic, and I absolutely agree. I think the science of tomorrow is going to look vastly different from the science of today, and not that far into tomorrow, right? According to you, maybe a couple of weeks. So with that said, we are going to end off this segment, this panel. Thank you all three of you for participating. This has been a very enriching conversation. I myself will be signing off as well, so I'll be handing over the baton to Ricardo to continue with SciCon. My parting remarks is, if you want to learn about other aspects of DeSci in the space, Algovera and Lateral are on our dashboard. Adrian, we need to talk, so I want to see if we can get Elicit onto the dashboard as well. And yeah, come check out these things. Ricardo, I pass it on to you.
Thank you so much, Jelani. Thank you all guys for coming to this panel. It's been really amazing. Really enjoyed your presence here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.